My name is Caleb Kubright, and this is Knightbeat. Tonight, a local injustice. We are discussing the Lincoln Annex School being sold by the city of New Brunswick to Robert Wood Johnson for a new cancer institute. That is all coming your way right here on Knightbeat. But for now, here's your host, Joey Block.
Welcome to Knightbeat. I'm Joey Block. Tonight, we're going to be breaking down the latest in the city of New Brunswick's plan to sell the Lincoln Annex School to Robert Wood Johnson to build a cancer pavilion. Last night, the New Brunswick Board of Education held a meeting at New Brunswick High School, and it was heated, to say the least. Local activists filled the room with signs ready, some saying, "Don't sell our school," or simply, F. Protesters made plenty of noise, especially when Charlie Cradaville was kicked out of the meeting. Attendees went wild to the point where the president of the board threatened to close down the meeting. Public speakers continued to rail against the board, which resulted in the meeting moving to a closed session. In the closed session, the board decided 6-0 to put the Lincoln Annex School sale into a facilities proposal, moving it one step forward. One member abstained, and another was not present. We'll be discussing the latest with the Lincoln Annex School sale with WRSU News reporters Melina Zavalos and Chris Sakonis. We'll also be taking your calls later on in the show at 732-932-8800. Again, that is 732-932-8800. You can also tweet at us at WRSU News to join the conversation. But first, joining me in studio is the leader of the hashtag Save Our School movement, New Brunswick Today editor Charlie Cradaville. Charlie, thank you so much for coming on the show tonight.
It's my pleasure, Joey. Thanks for having me.
So I want to start with last night, the latest development. So you were thrown out of the board meeting. We actually have some sound on that. So let's take a listen to that moment when you were thrown out of the school board meeting.
Superintendent, why didn't you want to be recorded? 5 minutes.
You reached your time, Mr. Cradaville.
Come on, guys. Let's not do this. Why? You're out of order now, Charlie. That's it. You're not going to turn this meeting upside down like you did last time. Charlie, that's just what you're trying to do. You're out of order. If you continue, you'll be asked to leave the meeting. Why? You're out of order. Your time's over.
Mr. Cradaville, you are out of order.
Why on earth didn't you want to be recorded? What did you have to hide?
Mr. Cradaville, please leave the meeting.
No, ma'am. I will not leave.
Mr. Cradaville, please leave.
This is no way to behave. You are public officials. You are elected to represent the community.
This is a reminder.
Every member of the New Brunswick
Mr. Henford.
So what was going through your mind at that moment?
So, first of all, I have some good news for your listeners. I actually was not thrown out of the meeting. As you heard, I was asked to leave, and I said no. I stood my ground. Thankfully, I was not ejected, but not everyone can say that. There were 2 people that were ejected later on in the evening. I was the first speaker out of about 20 that night, and things got off on the wrong foot. They were refusing to answer a very basic question about an illegal meeting they had a few days earlier. I was just asking why the superintendent had told the parents that they couldn't record him and what he was saying. That seemed to me to be very fishy and quite frankly, disrespectful for a guy who makes $245,000 in taxpayer funds to tell the people who he works for, I'm going to tell you important stuff about your kid's school, but I don't want you to record me or anything. So I was just asking why, and they, it's sort of like almost like a basketball thing. I feel like, a buzzer beater, right? When the basketball is in the air, when the buzzer goes off, if it goes in, it counts. So I felt like I got my question in before the 5 minutes were up. I wanted my answer, and they were just like, "Oh, your 5 minutes are up. We're not going to answer." And so that's where that standoff came from. And thankfully, I wasn't kicked out. But this has been an ongoing issue, really, for the past 6 months, ever since I got information that this was going to be the plan, that Robert Wood was going to make its move in conjunction with the New Brunswick Development Corporation to take over one of our best performing public schools and literally destroy it, demolish it, and close it down and displace 750 students to allow for their own expansion of the hospital. That just the latest in a long line of expansions of that Robert Wood Johnson campus, which has been displacing homes and businesses before, and even actually schools before too.
Yeah, so you mentioned that they ran out of time there. Although it may not seem fair, do you think these type of actions of trying to go beyond the time, do you really think that's going to accomplish anything with the board? Is that going to make them listen to you?
Well, for my purposes, I'm a journalist, right? So I need to get answers to my questions. And this board has been evading a lot of questions for many months. So we had a meeting in January where they changed their practices to make it harder for people to speak and ultimately disenfranchised dozens of people who came out to address them that night. They said, oh, new rule, you got to sign up in advance, and you guys didn't sign up in advance, so tough luck. And so a lot of people who would have asked good questions and would have made good points were denied that right in January. Then some of us signed up to speak at their February 11th meeting. That meeting was canceled. And then here we are now at, February 25th, finally getting a crack at asking them some questions in public on the record where they're being recorded, and they're trying to evade or limit the number of questions they're getting. I just didn't want to set a precedent that that's okay or that I'm going to stand for that. Like I said, I got my question in during the 5 minutes. I was owed an answer. I'm a New Brunswick resident too. They can't. They shouldn't be able to treat me like dirt, and they certainly shouldn't be treating the parents that way either.
Now, you mentioned at the top of your answer that you're a journalist. And a lot of people ask, especially the question in journalism school, of how close you should get to your story. You're on journalism, obviously. New Brunswick Today, which you're the editor of, has been covering this extensively. Do you think you're almost too close to this story now to be covering it like this?
I got to be honest. I wish this story never happened. I wish we didn't have to expose this kind of a scheme. Right. I wish that our Board of Education, if they really had the best interests of the children and families at heart, that they would have been upfront about this, and that they would have, back in September or earlier when this scheming was going on, that they would have been the ones to ask the questions and unveil the truth. But instead, it came upon me to do that because I had the information and I was the only one that was going to ask these questions. So I asked the questions, and the answers were so disturbing that I felt a need to also organize. And that's something else that I've, was fortunate enough to go to Rutgers and get a journalism degree. But I also did some, really had some really good experiences working within movements in the New Brunswick community. And, I could tell that, the answers we were getting were not satisfactory, that it really did seem like this was going to be a sellout, a giveaway of something that the community really valued, a school that's only been open for a few years, a public school. And so I felt as soon as I wasn't getting the good answers that we needed to have faith that the board was going to do the right thing, it felt it incumbent upon me to organize the community that would be affected by this and educate them about what was going on and how they could help change the course of history here. So I'm wearing two hats. Definitely, I'm the leader of a neighborhood organization in New Brunswick that has led the charge to fight this and is now part of a huge coalition, including on-campus and off-campus communities. But I'm also a reporter, and I'm not going to give up that hat just because there's some work that needs to be done to educate and organize as well.
Yeah, I get what you're saying, but as a reporter, you're technically supposed to be unbiased. Wouldn't you? A lot of critics would say, especially since you made so many criticisms of Cahill, wouldn't you technically be biased by saying these things? And so would New Brunswick Today?
I think that everyone has biases and, a perspective that they come from. And I think that it's kind of, a mistake to try to pretend that you don't. Right. So I don't pretend that I don't. I don't hold back. I don't tell folks that I have no opinions. Because I do have opinions, and I don't hesitate to speak those opinions as well as ask the questions that need to be asked. So I don't try to, I try not to let that kind of antiquated paradigm limit me in what, I feel needs to be done to empower my community here.
So I want to go a little bit back into time here. You were kind of talking about the movement and how it all started. What made you decide to be the leader of it? Since at that point, you've already lost your bid for the race for New Brunswick mayor, and you're running the New Brunswick Today. What made you say, you know what, I got to be the one to say this. I'm the one leading this thing.
Well, it was not something where I said, I need to be at the center of this or I want to be the leader. It was that this was something where if nobody did anything, they were going to get away with something very atrocious. And from my own history here in New Brunswick, I remember before I was ever running for anything or doing journalism, I remember the story of the Redshaw School. There was an elementary school in New Brunswick that was torn down, and the parents were told things very similar to what the parents of the Lincoln Annex kids were told. They said, we'll get you a new school in a couple of years. We're just going to put them in this warehouse for a couple of years, and then you're going to have a brand new school, and it's going to be great. It's going to be better. And, Mayor Cahill actually lied to my face in the basement of one of the river dorms where the Rutgers Democrats were having a meeting in October 2009. It's on video. He told, I asked him, I said, the Redshaw School's in my neighborhood. You've been bragging about securing funds to rebuild the Redshaw School, but it's dragged on for years and years. When am I going to see some construction going on there? And he said, you will see bulldozers by the end of the year. You'll see the work beginning by the end of the year. That was 2009. We didn't get a school. It took 10 years before the school finally opened from the time they tore it down. So the kids who were displaced ended up spending their entire elementary school career in that warehouse. It's owned by the mayor's friend and a donor to his political efforts. So seeing that history, I just couldn't let that happen to 750 kids in my community. And so I felt the need to speak up and use every privilege or opportunity that I had to raise awareness about that and get folks organized to stop it, because I feel that's a really rotten thing to do to kids, to take away their school, and put them in a subpar facility. It's just ridiculous.
So I got to ask you, why do you think, in your opinion, from what you've seen, why do you think the city of New Brunswick would want to do this to their citizens and, more importantly, their children?
Yeah, I mean, this unfortunately fits a pattern that the Cahill administration and before him, his cousin John Lynch and his administration have become known for, which is big development projects at the expense of the residents, smaller businesses, and in some cases, community institutions like schools. So we've seen so many things displaced and destroyed in New Brunswick. We used to have some real historic structures that are no longer there because they were destroyed, but also some important community institutions that have been pushed out, all in the name of, enriching corporations and helping them build bigger buildings that supposedly are going to benefit the community with jobs. And I've also seen how those promises have in some cases, really fallen flat, right? The promises were not delivered on. A great example is the supermarket in downtown. I lived on that block. I watched them destroy the entire block. I watched them build the huge parking deck and the, what was then called the Fresh Grocer supermarket. I worked in the Fresh Grocer supermarket. I got one of those jobs, and it was a terrible job. It was a $9 an hour job. The people running the place were really incompetent and did not treat their workers well. And of course, they didn't pay the rent to the parking authority, and they still owe $1 million. And that was a project done by some of these same characters, Cahill, Devco, the parking authority, the same forces that are, promising that this, thing that's going to displace an elementary school is actually going to be really good because it's going to create jobs. And, I'm skeptical because of all the broken promises over the years, whether it's the Redshaw School or the Fresh Grocer or the giant hole in the ground across from the Fresh Grocer, which has, persistently just done nothing more than accumulate liquids from time to time.
So I guess the real story is here, what they want to do with Lincoln Annex is they want to build a cancer pavilion. Mm-hmm. Why would that be such a concern? I mean, isn't cancer something you want to cure and you want to build something in order to combat the disease?
Yeah, I don't think any of us in this movement are against building a cancer hospital. I think it's a fine thing to do. I think we actually already have a cancer institute at 195 Little Albany Street, and this is an effort to expand that. And we just think that there's other places that it could expand to where you wouldn't have to displace a virtually brand new elementary school, right? It was an old Catholic school campus, but New Brunswick taxpayers paid $22 million to buy it, upgrade it, modernize it, renovate it, and reopen it as a public school. And that wasn't just an accident. That was done because we needed classroom space. The kids in that neighborhood were overcrowded in a 110-year-old school, the old Lincoln School, close to where we are now at the Rutgers campus. And we needed a supplemental school, an annex school, and that was opened with good reason. And the reason hasn't changed. There's still that population there. Those kids still need a school. So, I would rather see a cancer hospital built, for instance, on the site of the former Farron Mall, the giant hole in the ground in downtown, or on top of the existing Cancer Institute, or in place of some of the aging parking decks that Robert Wood owns, or on other sites in the neighborhood that would probably be more affordable for Robert Wood Johnson to acquire the land and build upon, but also less disruptive to the community. So none of us are against building a cancer hospital. We all think that would be a great thing for our city, and we just don't want to force kids out of their neighborhood school, especially considering the fact we all paid $22 million for it.
So some things I've noticed, and when I was talking to a lot of the activists who are part of this movement when I was covering multiple events with you, was the fact that some of them thought this was race-based because a lot of the kids affected would be kids of color. Do you think this as well?
Well, I certainly think that this type of a proposal would never even be made. It would be a non-starter in most school districts, right? Almost any suburban community, you said, we're going to destroy a relatively new elementary school and send the kids to a downgrade, a substandard place that's worse than where they're at, farther away than where they're at, to allow a private corporation to build on that land because the private corporation really wants it. I don't think that would fly in other areas where the community had more political power, and I think certainly the powers that be have written off the actual residents and the parents and the kids as people who are powerless and can be pushed around, can be moved, and that they won't put up a fight or they won't win the fight. And part of that has to do with race. Let's be honest. A lot of these families are immigrants, and I think that this is a really atrocious way to treat those people who are part of our community and deserve an education just like anybody else, regardless of race or status.
So speaking of race, going back to the meeting from last night, journalism professor Juan Gonzalez said that based on all of this talk around race and the Lincoln Annex School, that lawsuits will occur if this happens. We actually have some sound from that. Let's take a listen.
And then tomorrow you will all be receiving DEDCO, the city of New Brunswick, and RWJ letters from Latino Justice of intention to sue if you decide to go ahead with the sale.
What do you think he meant by this?
Well, I know that Latino Justice is formerly known as the Puerto Rican Legal Defense Fund, and they are a good organization that doesn't want to see this happen to us, a community that's overwhelmingly Latino, and also, not for nothing, economically disadvantaged, right? So I'm pleased to report that, we shared with your team today a letter from Latino Justice that they will be representing the Coalition to Defend Lincoln Annex in this matter. And we are going to use every opportunity, every option, every avenue at our disposal to stop this atrocious proposal from moving any further forward.
Regards to Rutgers, a lot of faculty have spoken out, including one in particular, David Hughes, who was the former vice president of the Rutgers WAUP AFT and is currently the treasurer and chief negotiator. What do you make of the fact that all these professors and student organizations are getting behind your movement?
Yeah, I mean, I think that it's really encouraging. It's been one of the things in New Brunswick that's lacking over the years is, connectivity between the students and the rest of New Brunswick. We, in many cases, are neighbors. We live side by side. We go to the same stores. We walk the same streets, deal with the same government apparatus. And in many cases, we don't talk to one another or are, somewhat segregated for a number of reasons. But this is an issue that, sad as it might be that we have to fight this fight, it's very encouraging to see the Rutgers student community step up and stand up for the elementary school community, the middle school community that would be affected by this. Because quite frankly, we're all students of public institutions, right? Public education is a value that I care about, and even though I may not have children in that particular school, I benefited from having a public education and going to a public school like Rutgers. So I don't want that to be diminished or taken away from anyone in my community if I can help it.
So Rutgers University gave an exclusive statement to WRSU News. It reads, quote, RWJ Barnabas's health proposal to build a hospital facility in New Brunswick to provide expanded clinical space requires the approvals of New Brunswick City governing boards and the New Brunswick Board of Education for the purchase of the Lincoln Annex School and construction of a school to replace it. While Rutgers is not the project developer, the university fully supports an outcome that will address the educational needs of families in a community by providing them with a state-of-the-art elementary school as quickly as possible and with little disruption as possible, and an outcome that provides the community with quality clinical care the hospital expansion will provide to New Brunswick, New Jersey, and beyond. Is this statement satisfying enough for you?
I have some follow-up questions. When and where, right? That's what the community wants to know. You're going to tell us we're going to get a new school? We don't want to get burned like the Redshaw parents got burned. That's what it comes down to. Redshaw parents were lied to. They were told they were getting a new school in a short period of time, and it took 10 years. So we want, quite frankly, for the school to be built first. It makes sense. With Redshaw, they were building the new school on the same site. So there was they had to have a temporary arrangement while the school was being built. It just took a long, long time. In this case, they don't have to do that. They can build the new school first, and then the students can move once from the current school to the supposedly better school at a new location, and then they can give or sell the property to the people who want it, and they can move forward with their project. But I think it only makes sense to insist on that first. And Rutgers doesn't seem to necessarily share that view that that's an important thing. They're saying as soon as possible. Well, that doesn't really do us very much good if your kid is the one that's going to have their school closed in 4 months.
So I want to ask you, since you kind of mentioned this a little bit in your answer, do you think there is I guess you could call it a two-state solution where Lincoln Annex School can stay where it is, but Robert Wood Johnson also gets their cancer institute?
Yeah, as I mentioned, there's a number of other sites that they could build on. I think their CEO has told me on video that if they can't acquire the school, they'll build it somewhere else. And I think that is the best solution is for them to find an alternative. Because there are alternatives. It's not that the entire city's built up and spoken for. There's plenty of spots that Robert Wood already owns that they could develop this on. You can build on top of things that already exist. So the existing cancer center is only about 5 stories tall. They could build up and make it a taller building and include all the stuff that they want to include without having to take up any more land. And again, they have parking facilities and other stuff that they could build on top of or instead of. And of course, there's that giant, massive crater in the center of our downtown that DevCo has been in charge of developing, and the governor has said is going to be an innovation and technology hub. So, common sense would say that a cancer research facility would fit very nicely into an innovation and technology hub, and you'd kind of kill 2 birds with one stone, because a lot of people are complaining about the giant crater in the center of downtown not being a very appealing welcome to folks coming in on the train station and not really serving any purpose for the community. why not just build it there? It's very near the Robert Wood campus. It would be accessible to people coming in on the train. Cancer patients from all over the state could come in and get straight to the Cancer Institute there. And you don't have to close down any schools to do it. So I would like to see them find an alternative, and I think that's really the best solution that the community supports.
Now, you mentioned that the governor wants a large technical hub. You actually went to a town hall of his recently in North Brunswick, and I remember at the march you were telling me how if the mayor's office couldn't protect these kids, maybe the governor will. Do you see the governor playing a role in any of this at all? Yeah, we were at the town hall in North Brunswick last Thursday, and I was pleased to see that the education commissioner, his head of the Department of Education, Lamont Repollet, was there. And Dr. Repollet is a Middlesex County guy. He's from Carteret. And, I personally went up to him and spoke to him about this issue and his staff. And I know a lot of the parents also did too. And we're trying to impress upon them that what's going on is wrong and that he and the Murphy administration need to step in and protect the school. New Brunswick is what used to be called an Abbott district. So we're, our schools are usually built with state money. And this is a situation where, you shouldn't be playing it both ways, right? You say, oh, we're needy. We need the state to help us, but we got an extra school to spare. We'll give it to Robert Wood, in exchange for nothing more than a promise that they'll one day build us a new one. I don't think that's a good practice to, set that precedent. And, quite frankly, I think the SDA needs to get their act together. The legislature needs to fund the SDA so that the state can build schools in the poor areas that they, there's a whole reason that whole Supreme Court case happened was that, these disadvantaged areas need quality facilities. And so right now the state's dropping the ball and we're seeing the private sector like, Devco and Robert Wood step up. And when you allow that to happen, what you allow is you allow those private corporations to start to dictate where and when our schools are built instead of the government and the elected officials that we have put into power. But going back to my original question, has the governor given you any personal statement of support? Oh, no, I have not. I did not speak to him personally that day. I did speak with his wife briefly, did speak to the commissioner. And we're pursuing, getting this issue higher on his radar because we know that, he is somebody who has expressed support for public education. And we want him to support this school because this is a great public school. So I want to move a little bit more in the political realm here. You're a Bernie Sanders guy. You've been actively pushing for him to win the Democratic nomination for president. Why are you backing him out of all the other candidates? Well, I support Bernie because his track record shows that he has been consistently correct on the most important issues facing our country. Issues of economic inequality, but also issues of wasteful spending on, wars and, issues of systemic corruption and, essentially, the elite powerful individuals and corporations buying our democracy and having undue influence over all sorts of legislation and stuff like that. And he's been somebody who's been in office, won a lot of elections, right? He was a very popular mayor in Burlington, Vermont. He got elected to the U.S. House of Representatives, where he served with honor and distinction. And then the people of his state chose to put him in the U.S. Senate. And throughout all this time, the most remarkable thing is that he hasn't sold out. Because so many people, there's so many stories of people who start as a real sort of advocate and fighter for the community helps get them elected, and then once they get in, they fall prey to that sort of money influence. And Senator Sanders has not. Senator Sanders is still saying the same things he was saying when he was a mayor in Vermont. And I got to respect anybody who runs as an independent and wins. I of course ran as an independent in the mayor election in 2018 here in New Brunswick, and I know how hard it is. And Senator Sanders probably had it even harder than me because he sometimes had to run against a Democrat and a Republican, and he still won because his ideas and his service really
has won over the support of his state. And I think we're starting to see the more people that actually get to learn about him and his record and what he has to say, he's getting a lot of support in the presidential race now because of his good views and his good agenda.
So you mentioned that you ran for mayor. Throughout this interview, you brought up Cahill's name many times, not in the nicest light. Are you thinking about maybe running again?
You know, I'm glad you asked, because a lot of people have been asking me, and I'm certainly open to it. I would not rule that out at this point. I think that it was a good experience running last time. I think that we helped plant the seeds for the type of movement that would be necessary to defeat his political machine that has run the city really since the late 70s, when his cousin John Lynch was first elected mayor. And the people are getting sick of that corporate sellout type of leadership. We need people who are going to stick up for the least among us, the people who don't have a lot of money, the people who have special needs and have ultimately need the support of the government to survive. And I think that Mayor Cahill has let down the city repeatedly over and over again and done the bidding of the big real estate developers. And, we see the results. We see some big buildings going up. We see some good things coming from it, but we also see huge failures like the Fresh Grocer, like the giant hole in the ground. And we see a crisis of priorities where, things like public schools are, disposable to the administration. They can say, well, this public school is, in the way of our efforts to expand a huge organization like Robert Wood Johnson. So let Robert Wood Johnson take the school, push them out, pressure the Board of Ed to do it. And I feel like the mayors meddling in our schools are not helping anyone. So I would much rather have a mayor that won't sell out the community. And if nobody else is stepping up to run, I would certainly consider doing it.
Charlie Gradeville, New Brunswick activist and editor at the New Brunswick Today. Thank you so much for joining me.
My pleasure, Joey. And thank you for covering this issue. You guys have done great work.
Well, thank you. Up next, we have our WRSU News reporters sharing their accounts of meetings and coverage of the whole Lincoln Annex School drama. That's all coming up right here on WRSU FM New Brunswick.
When might you be buzzed? When you suddenly love everything.
You guys! I love this song! I love these nachos. I love our kickball league! Ugh! I love this guy! What's your name? You know what I'd love? A ride when it's time to head out.
If you see a buzzed warning sign, call for a ride when it's time to go home. Buzz driving is drunk driving. A message from NHTSA and the Ad Council.
I love your car. Is this real leather?
Rutgers Lacrosse is taking on Stony Brook Saturday, February 29th at noon. Jake Schmid and Chris Sakonis have the call for WRSU. Be sure to check in on another early season lax matchup. Keep it locked to WRSU FM, New Brunswick.
Oh, it's good. It is. Oh, very.
Yeah. See what I mean? Brandy Alexander, they call it.
Yum, yum. You're going to try this delicious concoction. Brandy Alexander.
Brandy Alexander.
Yes, I'll have a Brandy Alexander, please.
You know something? You're absolutely right about that brandy thing.
Wait, Alexander.
About it making me feel good.
Brandy Alexander Show, every Monday, 11 a.m. till 3 p.m. on WRSU FM.
Hi, I'm your host, Smokey Cole Bear. Filling in for Smokey, because after 75 years of...
Only you can prevent wildfires.
Turns out there's much more to say. Nearly 90% of wildfires are caused by us humans being careless, dumping our used barbecue coals willy-nilly. Guess the song was wrong. We did start the fire. That's why I respect Mother Nature and her trees, whether coniferous or new car scented. Brought to you by the U.S. Forest Service, your state forester, and the Ad Council.
Welcome back to Knightbeat. I'm Joey Block. We've been talking to local activist and editor of the New Brunswick Today, Charlie Gradeville, here, and we had quite a wide-ranging interview from the Lincoln Annex to his support of Bernie Sanders and also his future plans as maybe running for mayor. Here to break it all down with me are WRSU News reporters Melina Zavalos and Chris Sakonis. Guys, thank you so much for joining me.
Happy to be here, Joey.
Yeah, sure.
So I just want to start off a little bit in the interview here. So Charles, I asked him in the beginning about the difference of being a journalist as well as being involved in the Rutgers community as a member. Do you guys think that there's a bit of a blurred line in there? I mean, what did you guys make of what he was saying on that?
I feel like it's easier to tell where someone stands when they're open with it. So like I think that it's not really a blurred line. I think it's like more ethical when they're open about their biases. So then you can tell for yourself like what you think.
Yeah, I couldn't agree more with that, Melina. I think that everyone is biased to some extent. I think true objectivity, as much as we strive for that here at WRSU News, it's kind of unrealistic to expect. So I think the best way to go about it is, like you said, recognize why you have the biases that you do. Try your best to ameliorate them, but acknowledge them. Be open about them, so that way people can take that into account when they hear what you're saying and come to their own conclusions. I think that's the best way to go about that.
So also one thing that I asked Charlie about at the end of the interview was his plans to run as mayor, since he ran back in 2018 as an independent against Cahill. He's pretty much said he was open to it, and then kind of talked about some things that maybe he would talk about on a campaign trail. What do you guys think?
Well, I think that this is it's an interesting topic because New Brunswick is in a really interesting spot right now with the Lincoln Annex situation is sort of like a microcosm for where New Brunswick is as a whole. There's sort of like a battle between one side, which is like pushing for all these development projects and new buildings and all that, and the other side that sort of sees their neighborhood changing and they don't like it and they don't really they don't know what to make of it, and they're afraid that they're going to get left behind. And I think that this is a really interesting spot for New Brunswick to be in, and I'm not saying one side is completely right and the other side is completely wrong, but what I'm saying is that it's kind of a weird position, and anyone who wants to be the mayor of New Brunswick is going to have to make clear to the voters what their position is on that in order to, try to assert themselves and try to make a name for themselves with the voters. So what side is right, what side is wrong, I'm not fully qualified to say, but that's an issue that anyone who wants to run for mayor is going to have to address. And, for what it's worth, I think that Charlie Crowderville is at the forefront of making his voice on that heard, and he's taking up this cause and other causes in New Brunswick. So I think in that respect, I think Charlie's well positioned to be sort of the voice for that side of it, the side that's concerned about all this development. And I think that that's an interesting angle to look at as we get towards the next election.
So, Melina, I want to get your thoughts on this.
Well, I'm not originally from New Brunswick, so I'm still registered to vote back home. But I would certainly be interested in hearing what Charlie would have to say about his run for mayor. I'd follow it, definitely.
So also one thing, going back to the Lincoln Annex School thing. So a lot of what Charlie pointed to was Robert Wood Johnson is expanding at a large rate. It's not necessarily that there's a problem with the fact they want to build a cancer institute. It's the fact that they're expanding more onto land. They've expanded in wide ranges. Do you guys think that he's got the winning argument here and he's going to be the one to ultimately win this fight?
Well, I don't know how it's going to go down, but I feel like if the members of the community, like people who live here, oppose it so strongly, I feel like that should definitely be taken into account.
I agree with that. I just don't know how ultimately effective it's going to be. You got to keep in mind, we're dealing with, not only are there powerful interests, DEFCO, RWJ, the school, all that. They're not only all behind that, but they're under a lot of pressure to get this thing going ASAP. Like Tabin in New Brunswick did an article about it, and they mentioned that Rutgers and RWJ could be eligible for millions of dollars of grant money and other benefits if they get this ground broken on this by the end of the year. So in terms of who's going to prevail, I think that ultimately, this will be built one way or another in a certain frame of time. And I think that the most likely outcome for, in terms of the activists, is to try and come up with a situation for a temporary school that they find more acceptable than what the Board of Education and DevCo is currently proposing.
So I want to ask you guys about something slightly different topic, but I asked Charlie about this, was his support for Bernie Sanders. A lot of what he talked about, he seemed almost like he was comparing himself to Bernie Sanders away, considering they both ran as an independent in some form, and they're both into these ideas of challenging the system and making a very systemic institutional change. Do you guys think there's a comparison to be made?
I think there's definitely a comparison to be made in terms of the overall theme of drastic revolutionary change versus the sort of incrementalism we've gotten from both establishments on each side. So I see a lot of similarities between the two, and I can see why they could be viewed as natural allies. And I'm not sure, one, if that message has enough broad support to ultimately prevail, either in New Brunswick or more specifically across the country. But I think part of the reason why we're seeing this sort of uprising is because of things like gentrification in cities like New Brunswick, but also, to go back to your point about Bernie Sanders, all across the country, millions of workers feel displaced. Millions of workers feel that America has sort of left them behind, and they hear about this great economy, but they don't see it. And for what it's worth, it's not just Bernie Sanders. I think that could also help explain why Donald Trump became president in 2016. So in terms of what we're seeing now is sort of like a backlash against the establishment, and DevCo could sort of be a stand-in for the establishment here. I think that that's really what we're looking at.
Melina, your thoughts?
Yeah, I mean, Bernie's leading in all the primaries right now, and I definitely see the similar ideologies between him and Charlie. So, I get why he supports him, and I mean, it would be nice to see maybe more of that in New Brunswick, more change.
So a lot of people have been talking about how Mayor Cahill's been here since the 90s. So he's going into 30 years now in his term. He's been unchallenged for the most part up until now. Do you think this is going to be the thing that does him in, ultimately?
It's very tough for me to be able to confidently say that, because not only has he been here so long, but he's so well established in the city of New Brunswick. I don't know if this alone would be enough to do him in, just because of the inertia that he has. But I will say this. I think that gentrification is one of, if not the major stories in the story of New Brunswick over the last 30 years. And I think that it's sort of reached a tipping point where the people who have lived in this city and in this area for decades are starting to have enough of all the gentrification, and we're sort of seeing a backlash in that respect. And I think Lincoln Annex, to go back to my earlier point, is a prime example of that. You can sort of look at the Cancer Pavilion as a stand-in for, all these apartment buildings, all these, you could talk about the Yard, you could talk about all these places on and around campus that have sort of changed the character of the city and, you could say, driven some residents out. And that's really why we're seeing what we're seeing.
Melina, final word?
Yeah, I mean, if the guy's lasted that long, it's got to be for a reason. So I could definitely see him lasting longer, but I guess it's up to anybody who disagrees with him to do something about it.
Yes, and I want to note that we have invited the mayor to come on the show and defend his position. We are working with their office, and we hopefully will be having him on soon to defend his side of the things. WRSU News reporters Melina Zavalos and Chris Sakonis, thank you so much for joining me. I really appreciate it. All right, so now we're going to be taking your calls coming up. We already have some phone people calling in, so if you want to have your voice heard, all you got to do is dial 732-932-8800. Again, that is 732-932-8800. And also, if you want to join us, the conversation another way, you can tweet at us at WRSU News. Again, that is at WRSU News, and we will be happy to answer any questions or address any comments you have. That's all coming your way right here on WRSU FM New Brunswick.
Uh-oh, Brad's buzzed.
Oh, yeah?
Yeah, he's starting with the woots. And now a speech.
I just want to say that friendship is about heart and brain. Who's with me?
Good thing is, he knows when he's buzzed.
And my brain is saying, when it's time to go home, somebody call me a ride.
Love that guy.
Me too.
Know your buzzed warning signs? Call for a ride when it's time to go home. Buzz driving is drunk driving. A message from NHTSA and the Ad Council.
Breaking news. I, Joey Block, have an hour-long news show called Knightbeat, which airs every Wednesday night at 10 p.m. On the show, I break down the latest stories from right here at Rutgers to the national level with a wide variety of guests. That's all right here on WRSU FM New Brunswick. Welcome back to Knightbeat. I'm Joey Block. We've been talking about the Lincoln Annex School sale that's been happening recently here, and the talk of a proposed sale, and now it's been moving a little forward here. Anyway, back with us is local activist Charlie Cradaville, along with the rest of the reporters in studio, Melina Zavalos and Chris Sakona. So we're going to be taking some calls here. We actually already have one. We have Tom from Point Pleasant. Tom, how you doing tonight?
I'm good. Can't complain, Another day in paradise.
So, Tom, what is on your mind tonight?
Look, here's what I don't understand about this whole Lincoln Annex thing is, how can the town of New Brunswick and Rutgers as a whole just not have a plan for these kids to put them on this site that is unsafe and everything? Like, where's the thought process there?
So, Charlie, would you like to address his logic?
Yeah, I mean, I got to be honest, over the past 6 months, I assumed that the powers that be were scheming to make this deal happen, but that they were simultaneously acquiring land for a new school to be built. And when the mayor finally rolled out the plans on February the 4th, I was really, shocked that they had not even a piece of land acquired yet. Because I could understand saying, well, we're going to keep this on the DL so that we can acquire the land before we tell people that we're going to use this for such and such project, because that will increase the value and the price of the land. But they came to us with such a flimsy proposal. They do not even own the land where they want to build the school. It's not owned by DevCo, not owned by Robert Wood, not owned by the city, not owned by the Board of Ed. It's privately owned, and it's contaminated. So you're talking about adding time and money to the timeline for when a new school would be built if you have to acquire the land. If they include 121 Jersey Avenue, you'd also have to relocate the tenants of that building, demolish that building, see what you find in the soil as far as contamination goes, then remediate it. That's a process that can take years and ultimately millions of dollars to do. So I was really kind of flabbergasted that they don't have a real plan. They have a very flimsy plan.
Tom, go ahead.
Because it's a great idea that they're building this cancer institute. Great on them, but you can't just leave these kids out high and dry. And you were mentioning something about it being contaminated. I never even heard about this one.
Oh, yeah. 131 Jersey Avenue. I went up there. I did a Facebook Live video on our New Brunswick Today page. You can see the site for yourself. It's a huge concrete foundation. It was a factory that made engines for Mack trucks, and also had a number of other uses over the years. But it's just been a contaminated site, and has not been remediated to the standard it would need to be a school yet. So that's, again, millions of dollars and potentially many years added to the cost of this project.
It's an absolute amazing situation seeing the incompetency at work here.
Agreed.
Absolutely amazing. Thank you so much for clearing that up. Greatly appreciate it.
My pleasure, Tom.
Tom, thank you so much for calling in. I appreciate it. So, Charlie, just going off of that a little bit here, since, again, we had Tom who called from Point Pleasant, that this seems to be an issue that's appealing to people outside the bubble of New Brunswick. Do you think this is something that other people from other townships can relate to?
Yeah, like I said, this wouldn't fly in most communities. Most places, we care deeply about our kids. They are the future. Public schools are important. And to prioritize something else above that, so much so that you would just, abruptly displace 750 students, I think that really hits home with a lot of people as something they wouldn't want their kids to be in that situation. Now, we do have situations where sometimes a school is a victim of a fire or a flood or overcrowding, and they have no choice but to make temporary arrangements for temporary classrooms, sometimes in trailers or other temporary facilities. Sometimes it's unavoidable. This is completely avoidable. They are creating the crisis by insisting on having this development on the site of Lincoln Annex and insisting on starting construction right away this summer. There are so many ways to avoid this. We don't need to be temporarily warehousing anyone. There's obvious solutions to any of us. We could think of ways that this could be avoided, some of which we've talked about tonight, including building the new school first.
So, Chris, I want to go to you on this since you are covering the most recent. You were at the meeting last night. As I said at the top of the show, the board voted in favor of moving this forward to where they would put the proposal for the sale in a facilities proposal. I mean, what do you make of this? Do you think that this is going to get some major pushback?
It'll definitely get major pushback. I just don't know to what extent it's going to be effective, just because of the sheer interests that are at play here. We're talking about DevCo, we're talking about RWJ, we're talking about the mayor's office, we're talking about a coalition of the most powerful groups in New Brunswick, all, from my perspective, from what I could gather, wanting to get this going as quickly as possible because of the various incentives at play, as I mentioned before. And it's going to be very difficult there's definitely going to be pushback, no question about that. Like I said, I don't see a scenario in which this gets scrapped and Lincoln Annex gets saved. I think the most likely outcome is somewhere in the middle where Lincoln Annex gets torn down and an alternative interim plan, an alternative site is found. And I think that's where I see it most likely going. But I don't think the activists are going to get everything they want. And I don't think that DevCo and the board are going to get their current proposal passed.
Melina, where do you see this thing going?
Honestly, I feel the same way. I can't really tell where it's going to go, but I think both sides are going to have to make concessions, and nobody's going to come out perfectly on the other side.
So, Charlie, final word to you here, since we're getting ready to wrap up the show here. What if people want to get more involved with this, or how should they find more information on this?
So, the organization that I'm with is called the 5th and 6th Ward Neighborhood Association, and we are having a meeting on Monday, March 2nd at 6:30 p.m. in the Hungarian Heritage Center at 300 Somerset Street. Anybody who wants to learn more or get involved can join us there. And there's also going to be a number of government meetings coming up in the near future as well. We'll certainly be, speaking with the city council about this. And on March 9th, the planning board is being asked to change the zoning for, the Lincoln Annex site to allow for the development. And so the evening of March 9th, we're, going to be hoping for a big turnout there. And, people who want to learn more can come. They can hear what the planning board has to say. And they can also, if they want, speak up at that meeting. And they'll have a chance to ask questions and make comments as well. That's at City Hall on March the 9th.
Charlie Cradaville, Melina Zavalos, Chris Sakonis, thank you all so much for coming on the show. I really appreciate it.
My pleasure, Joey.
Of course.
All right. That does it for us tonight. Thank you all so much for calling in. We didn't get time for everyone's calls this week. Unfortunately, that's what happens when you only got an hour show. But we will try again next week. But thank you all so much for your calls. Thank you for listening. Coming up, it's going to be more WRSU music programming here on 88.7 WRSU FM, New Brunswick.